Welcome to That 30s Show, a podcast where we talk about the good, the bad, and the surprising parts of our 30s. I'm G, and I'm finally 30. I'm excited to find out if 30 really is the new 20, because if it is, then the best years are yet to come.
And I'm David. I'm entering my mid-30s. I used to have no back pain or trouble sleeping, but now I live off a healthy diet of self-help books and dream of being in bed by 10 p.m. every night. Join us each week as we try to figure out together what life in your 30s is all about.
Welcome back to That 30s Show. So today I don't have a David with me. He's away, but I am joined by one of my best friends, Alexi. Hi, Alexi. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So today it's going to be a bit of a girl chat because David's not here. How are you feeling today, Alexi?
Nervous.
Me too. You and me both, because this is the first time that Dave is actually not here for me to do an interview. I just realized I did a solo episode, but I haven't actually interviewed anyone. So we can vibe this out and we'll see how it goes. But so Alexi and I have known each other since grade 8, I want to say. We didn't since grade 8. So we've been friends for a long time. I don't know. I don't even know how many years that is.
Yeah, I've lost track.
Yeah. So we've been through a lot of life stuff. And I wanted to bring Alexi on for a while now because on the show, we talk a lot about how people always have different life experiences, especially when we go into our 30s. Some people, we've interviewed people who are single and living life like me. Well, you didn't interview me, but like me. And we also interviewed, people who are married with kids. We've interviewed mothers and fathers. And then most recently, 2 episodes ago, we interviewed Jonathan, who has been married and divorced. And so, Alexi brings on another unique perspective to this. And so I really wanted to hear about her experience, because I'm sure there's people out there listening that can relate in some ways to her relationship and things like that. Okay, so Alexi, oh man, where do I begin with this conversation? So I guess Alexi brings on a unique perspective and experience in the sense that, Alexi, you were in a long-term relationship starting from your early 20s, and then that led into you getting engaged at some point. I think it was the 7 or 8 year mark, and then ultimately, deciding to end that engagement. So I think it's we want to hear about everything, all the details about your experience, but also it's just I feel there's so many pieces to it. So maybe to start, do you want to just share a little bit about that journey, I guess, or that timeline? So what age did you start this relationship? How long did you guys date for? How long were you engaged for? Just give us the background on this.
Okay, so I want to say we started dating when I just turned 21, actually. So literally just 20s, early 20s. So we actually started, actually, let me backtrack to that. We actually met online.
Yes.
So that was early
You were
stages.
one of the original people starting online dating trend, I remember.
Yeah. It was not a thing yet. I think back then everyone only heard about eHarmony.
Yeah.
And then
Okay, Cupid.
Yeah, but we didn't meet on there, but anyway, so that's how we first met. And then we started dating. So yeah, that was summertime when I just turned 21. It was pretty much, so it was a long distance relationship because he was going to school in Kelowna. Mm-hmm. And then we're in Vancouver. So, yes, it's only 4 or 5 hours away, but there's still that distance.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much how it started. They were a year older than me. So they were 22, I was 21. So we were both young.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now that I look back at it, I actually think that's very young. At the time,
Yeah.
I felt like that was old.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
right? Like, I feel like back then, there was this set timeline because my parents married very young. They,
Mm-hmm.
I think, married when they were like 23.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that was like at the right time, what it felt like meeting
Yeah.
this person. Because I was like, okay, 21, 22, we'll be together for a little bit and then move on.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
with the trajectory that life tells us.
For
um,
sure.
so overall, the whole relationship was 7.5 years. We moved in together when this was actually 2019, end of 2019. So
Okay.
I want to say that was 5 years and a bit into the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So we moved in together first before shortly being engaged. So it was about a year after we moved in together, and then we got engaged. And then it was another year and a bit, I want to say, before the relationship ended.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the quick timeline
Yeah, that's a
of that.
timeline, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like back then, I mean, even though you guys were together for 7 years, I feel like because like your early 20s, some of those years almost like don't count when you count the amount of time that you spend together. Like I feel like the relationship almost feels like it begins once you're into your late 20s, because that's when you start thinking like seriously about like
Yeah.
the relationship, you know, because yeah, you're right. I mean, even back when we were like 21, I feel like the timeline is still so different from today. I think today everyone feels like the timeline's kind of pushed back a little bit.
Yeah.
At least maybe that's how I feel. I don't know if it's always been that age, or it's just that we're in it now and then we're like, oh, that seems so young. But like, especially for our parents' time, like that was like the right time and almost like
Yeah.
old at that point, because you're like, you're 21, like you should be engaged or whatever. Like the timelines were just, it feels so different back then. And then being in a like a long distance relationship when you're that young, like what was that like? Was it hard, or was it, I guess you guys saw each other still, right? Pretty often.
Yeah, like there was this one period where it was for at least I want to say 4 months early on in the relationship where we didn't see each other at all.
Mm,
And I think that was I because it was so early on in the relationship, I didn't think it was that difficult. It didn't really
mm-hmm,
change much into like my lifestyle because I still got to do what I wanted to do, but
yeah,
then I had this one person there, you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
Um, but like later on, I guess I realized that that wasn't gonna work for me
Mm-hmm,
because I guess I learned through that I wanted someone that was present there physically.
mm-hmm.
It was a different kind of connection, I
Yeah.
want to say, that I wanted, not just like virtually in a
Yeah.
way. So it was
Like
different.
FaceTime. Yeah.
Yeah, like that wasn't very me. Like I didn't
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
So um yeah, so I mean I didn't know that at the time.
Plus, you were
So
young. Like, if you asked, like, for example, me now, if I would do a long distance relationship, I'd be like, no, like to start out that way too, because it's like, yeah, well, at least like for now, it's things are more fast tracked, but it's hard, I would imagine, right? Because you're not seeing them all the time.
yeah, this was my first serious relationship really
Mm,
because I did have like a couple boyfriends here and there before him,
yeah. Yeah.
but this one was my first serious relationship, and I didn't even
Yeah.
think it was going to be that serious until I
Yeah.
was in it.
Until 7.5 years later, you're like, whoa, that was serious.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So if you
uh,
had to think back to like the beginning of that relationship and then fast forward to the end, I mean, I'm gonna take a wild guess that there was a lot of changes since when you were 21 and then when you were almost, 30. But what were some like major changes that you noticed both as like an individual, if your changes in like personality or mindset or anything like that, and just the relationship in general. I mean, there were so many phases that you just talked about, right? Like being together for a little bit, then doing the long distance, then moving in together and everything like that. Like, did you notice any major changes?
Now that I can look back at it, yes, definitely lots of changes.
Yeah.
And I think it was, well, first, I mean, it's individually. As a person, I felt like before I was in any type of relationship, I was more of the independent type. So I wasn't used to relying on someone else to do certain things. It might be like day-to-day tasks, or like just having someone there to support me in difficult moments. I always thought it was just I would have to do all that for myself. But then having someone there was totally different for me in that sense, that I had to open up to that.
Yeah.
But then I think at some point I became too reliant on that other individual. Because I never realized like that I needed to step back as well, and that I couldn't rely on someone for all of my like wants, needs, etc. Like I had to take care of myself too in that sense.
Yeah.
So like I think that was a big thing that I learned from beginning to end. That's a big change for me. And I only realize that now because I'm not in that anymore. But then during, I didn't see it at all. Even such as like seeing my friends was not like that, actually declined so much during the span of the relationship. And I think it was because it was a lot of focusing on the relationship rather than focusing on us as individuals in the relationship. So I think that was another thing that was kind of like that dwindled, unfortunately. And then as a relationship in general too, like in the beginning, I would say we were both young, so we were both so excited to have the experience new things together, to have that one person to experience all these new things. And I felt like near the end that also kind of dwindled, unfortunately. But I think it's because throughout, it's possible that we just ended up growing apart in that sense, where our wants and needs changed throughout the span of the relationship. So I think that's why
it ultimately ended.
Yeah,
I mean,
that was
I
part
mean,
of it.
Yeah, I relate to that a lot because like I also feel like I'm very independent person. And so like I definitely relate to like how you were at the beginning, right? And then what I'm hearing is that it's like throughout the relationship, you'd want to have like your own things, like your own interests and like friend groups and things like outside of the relationship. But it sounds like you guys were like very together all the time. And then it kind of just like you wanted to experience things together. But at a certain point, it was like you didn't even have like the individuality aspect of it anymore in the relationship. And then like, you know, without seeing your friends and stuff like that, it's like almost a bubble, I guess.
Yeah.
Say, like that you were in. Yeah.
I agree, because like I think in general I feel like I was a hard like romantic honestly. So I thought that the main goal is I need to find this one person, and that's going to be the person that I'm going to do everything with, and that's all that's going to matter. But really, it shouldn't just be that. Like you need to be who you are as well and do what you want to do without having to constantly think about just like the other person. Like you have to think about yourself. And
it's like a one track mentality that you have. It's like, okay, this is, and then when you're so like convicted in that, you're like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what it is. And like stuff like that, you almost like block out everything else. And then also like just being young in general, right? You're just like, this is where my life is going. This is the track it's going. You don't like step back. But I mean, hindsight is always 2020, right? Like when you're in a relationship, I'm sure it's harder to see. And then especially if you're not seeing like your friends often or other people to like give you that outside perspective, you're like, this is it. This is my bubble.
I think like what happened too was I was one of the first ones in our like group that got into like a serious relationship. So I didn't really have other friends at the time that I could
to, like relate to.
To relate to, confide in, etc. So then I thought that I just had to just figure it out, wing it on my own. And then like, when I was in it, like I thought like, oh, I guess this is just how it is. This is how it's supposed to be, because it was so early on. Like, and then I guess, you know, like they say like sometimes like you have those rose-colored glasses on, right? And I think that's where I was stuck in that mindset. That like, oh, okay, I guess this is how it's supposed to be. Like, oh yeah, it was good and like really fun in the beginning, and then I guess like, you know, you get comfortable. That's just what it is.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you guys lived together for a bit. And I often hear people say that like, you don't really know a person until you start living with them. I know people like will say like going on trips is like a little glimpse of seeing how they are on like a day-to-day basis. But would you agree with that? Like, is there anything that you saw that were like surprises or observations when you guys started living together, like since your early 20s and then your late 20s? I mean, not everything like the day-to-day, you know, if they're messy or clean or whatever, but like other things you know. Sorry. She's like, I'm going to scratch off my whole list then. No, but it's like anything that you notice when you start like living with someone?
It would be, I think, witnessing what like the things that they say, like, you know, before you move in, and then you usually talk about it before you actually start to move in, like, oh, how is life going to be together when we start moving in? And then once you actually move in, and then I mean, it's, you kind of put their word against them, right? You're like, oh, you said you would do this, we would do this, or you would be this, and then you realize like some of those things were just talk. And
it's
not
like expectations versus reality kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, right? But it's a lot harder than just like when you just talk about it, because if you've never actually like lived with like another person besides like family, it's getting used to their habits, mannerisms, and just like their presence being there 24 hours, if it is 24 hours, like especially during like COVID, for example.
It's you again.
And then like trying to figure out ways to still have your own space in that space together, if that makes any sense. And it's not just like physically, but even like mentally as well. So I think like besides all the day-to-day about like, oh yeah, like they don't wash the dishes like right after, like, oh, they like me to nag them a little more before they do things. I think that's like the major thing, is like the whole expectation versus reality. It's definitely very different. And I think what makes it more important is like, I think the communication aspect needs to get highlighted even more once you move in together. If you didn't already have that like beforehand. And I think that becomes more important like when you do move in together.
Because it is kind of the day-to-day stuff that gets added up too, right? Like even though I was joking about, you know, that's like the day-to-day stuff, but a lot of those kind of like add up.
It does, yeah. Like now that I'm like thinking back at it, I think those are just as important as the big things, because it shows that your partner is showing up, you know, for what they need to get done as well. Like they can't just rely on the other person for everything. Like they live at home with their parents.
And I really do think that it's like, you know, you're talking about how there's like maybe promises that are made when you move together, or like it's all like sweet talk and stuff like that. And some of it I feel like is, or most of it is probably not intentional, but they like that person might actually feel like that's what they're going to do. Like they had all these expectations on themselves too. And they had something in their mind where they're like, oh, like this is, you know, especially if it's like moving in together for the first time, I would imagine it's like, okay, I'm going to do this, this, and this. Like I'm moving out for the first time. This is what I'm going to do. But then like, it ends up falling short once they actually move in. So it's like maybe they even had a picture of what they wanted things to be like, but then it was like, oh, it ended up, and like you said, just falling because you guys have been together for so long. It just kind of was like comfortable in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, moving forward a little bit, I mean, you got engaged, and then your engagement was, you say it was 2 years? 1 year?
Yeah, I want to say, I guess, a year and a half. So, yeah, a year and a half. And then when it ended, it was it was like 4 or 5 months before the actual wedding date.
The actual wedding day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy whirlwind. Yeah, I mean, did you at any point like feel during even the engagement period that it just like wasn't right for you? Like, did you have any reservations or hesitations going into like moving towards the wedding? I know it ultimately ended, you know, pretty like soon to the wedding, but during that time, like what was kind of going through your head?
Like beforehand, right? So I think like any girl, when you first get engaged, like you're so excited. Like you literally like on the day of or the next day, I was like looking for venues, for like places to get dresses, like photographers, videographers. Like I was like on top of that, like the day of, the day after, etc. I was excited, of course. That was like, I felt like I was waiting for so long to get this ring on my finger.
Yeah.
No, not there anymore.
I mean, I cried, so.
Yeah, so like, yeah, I was really excited. And then that excitement turned into stress once you actually get into the thick of like planning the wedding. And then I feel bad saying it, but I actually like, I think maybe at least 6 months into the planning, like I wasn't as excited anymore.
I can feel that, right? It's like it's a lot. It's stressful.
Yeah. Like, but now again, I can only say this now because I'm looking back at it, but I think that was already a kind of a sign that maybe like I didn't want like a wedding. Because like it was during COVID when I had to do all this planning. So how big the wedding was going to be kept changing. Like, we were going to have over 100 people, but then, because of COVID restrictions, we couldn't have that many people. So we constantly had to change the amount of like guests that we could have. And then the more and more that like it kind of dwindled down to like how many people we could actually have. More and more I was like, I'm more than happy if we just like elope. Like, why do I need this like huge wedding? You know, why do I need
it?
Like part of me was like, okay, like when you look at the finances of a wedding, it's a lot, right? I know you've had guests who had weddings.
Olivia's definitely talked about that. Yeah.
All right. So like to me at that point, I was like, what's the point? Why do we want to spend all this money for this one day? And then just for the sake of having a wedding and being married. Anyway, so I mean that's a thought that I have now looking back at it. Like during, I was just like, like I think maybe those were also the thoughts I had, but I never really entertained them that much at the time because I was like, well, I said yes, like to this wedding. Like I can't say no now, right? Like,
Yeah.
because normally once you get engaged, it's expected that you're supposed to have a wedding,
Mm-hmm.
and then yeah, marriage, and then kids.
Yeah.
So like that was
Yeah.
like the trajectory. So then I was just kind of going with it, because at that time my ex was going to, you know, cover the wedding, and then it was because something that his family really wanted to have, and then something that of course my family wanted to have for me, because I would say we had very traditional parents. So I just went with it.
Yeah. I mean, something that I've learned about weddings is that it's often about the family. Like it's like, this is what your family wants. This is what your family dreamed of. And of course, like that person has to want it too. But it's like a lot of the times it revolves around family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the end, I think you're at the end of the... I don't even know.
Sort of by the end, like, I mean, I don't know how much you want to share, but, you know, towards the end, it was, like, you know, getting to that point where the engagement ended. I guess, like, sort of like, what were your feelings during it? What was kind of your thought process? I mean, did you have any like fears about, you know, judgment or opinions from other people about like the decision to end that relationship? You know, what was your thought process like?
Yeah.
And sort of how did you handle it? You know, like I mean, obviously you don't have to get into like why or whatever, but it's sort of like, I'm curious about that whole mentality kind of at the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it. So pretty much, so, like, it was 5 months before the wedding. I found out they cheated on me, and so that event happened, but that honestly was not the only driving factor of why ultimately we chose to part ways, and why the wedding didn't happen. When it came to actually making that decision, he asked like how I thought, like, you know, like what thought process was, right? I did care at the time about what my family thought more than what my friends thought at the moment, because and it was my family, not even my immediate family, not even my parents, not my sister or my parents. It was more so my extended family, like my aunts, uncles, those who aren't even in the vicinity. Like they all are in like the Philippines, and I cared more about what they thought in a way, because if I thought my parents were traditional, they're even more traditional in my family. So it was me and my sister. I have an older sister, and it always was quite apparent that I was on the correct timeline or trajectory of life. So it almost appeared as if I was like the golden child. So like I met this person when I was 21. You know, they were stable. They ended up having a good career. They were nice. You know, like they treated me well. So everyone thought like, okay, so obviously after a while they're going to get married, have kids, etc. So to me, I knew that they had that in their minds, and then the fact that I was going to no longer be in that trajectory, it was more so that factor, I want to say, that made it difficult for me, like to make the decision of ending it, because then if I'm not on that trajectory, then who am I? Or like what are they going to think about me? Are they going to think that that I'm no longer a golden child?
Like they really put you on a pedestal, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like
unintentionally, right? And then I did that to myself too, because I followed that trajectory.
Yeah.
But it was more so, it was because it was easy.
Yeah.
Honestly, once you're on that path, it was easy. So that's why I kept going
Yeah.
in a way
Yeah.
until I realized that was not going to be it. And then, but it's almost like I needed that push off that trajectory to realize that my wants and needs aren't any of those that were kind of laid out for me.
Yeah.
And I think it was laid out for me by my family in a way. So that's why I cared more about what they thought.
Yeah.
In
hindsight, do you still feel like your family was like had put you onto that pedestal, or do you feel like in some ways like it was also you thinking that your family had put you on the pedestal, or was it actually your family that put you on that pedestal?
I think it's a combination of both. I think like I can never just put it on them, but then because it's interesting because like we can look back at it now, like just how much like our upbringing really affects how we are today. So that's why I'm like, I like to say it's both. Like it's never just going to be me or them. Yeah. It's going to be both. Because I guess in a way, like I didn't want to be the child that my parents scolded because I saw how they scolded my sister. Yeah. So it was like my sister unfortunately also is part of that, right?
So it's like a bit of a combination.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So you really thought about like the extended family, and I guess like because your extended family isn't here, like they're not here to kind of witness the day to day. So maybe like to them, it's like, oh, like it's like this perfect relationship and like you're on the way, you're on your path, you're getting engaged, you're getting married soon. So they don't really know like the ins and outs of everything. Whereas maybe like your family does like a little bit more. And so to them, it would probably like be a real surprise, right? Like, oh my God, what is this happening? Why is this happening?
Yeah, so actually, overall throughout the whole process too, I would say I was very private about it. And I think that helped I was really private in the relationship, but I was especially private when it ended. Yeah. Because I'm not the type to have to announce to the world, like, oh, it's over. Yeah. you know? Yeah. Like, I was never that type of person.
Like an Instagram post.
Yeah. Or delete everything as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was never that type. And I think that helped me because then when I was actually ready to like kind of talk about it more, then it was easier to talk in general.
Yeah. So what was their reaction to everything?
So they never approached me because they would be too shy to ask me like what happened, right?
Details, yeah.
Yeah. So honestly, it's almost been, I think it's roughly 2 years now. Yeah, 2 years since the breakup, and I actually recently went to the Philippines end of last year, so they really didn't ask me until then when they saw me in person. Yeah. So at that point it wasn't fresh anymore, so whatever like questions and such that they had, it was more like filtered in a way because it's like, oh, moments passed, she's good now. Yeah. I mean, end of the day, yes, I cared about what they thought, but then they're not the ones who have to live with the decision. So for sure. I still made the decision that I was comfortable making, and I'm honestly very happy with the decision.
Yeah. You really kind of dealt with it by yourself, I guess, in a way, because like you didn't really want the outside noise to affect that decision. Did you think that was, sounds like you think that was like the right choice? Like it was good for you to process everything yourself and not really have family kind of weigh in and everything like that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I did talk to family and I talked to friends, but they all also approached their conversations with me where they would give a little bit of their like thoughts and opinions, but they would of course never tell me what I should and shouldn't do. I think that was I was very lucky that I had that much support and that type of support from my friends and family, that they weren't just telling me like, oh, are you sure? Like you want to end it?
Yeah.
Like they never approached me in that way. Like it was very like whatever I decided, that they would support me. So whether it was staying or leaving, they never made me feel like it only had to go one direction. So I think that was what helped me a lot.
Yeah. Well, that's good advice for both people who might be going through that and for the support group, that if you have friends who might be in that kind of situation. I guess you've talked about it kind of throughout already, but any advice that you would give people who are maybe in a similar situation? I mean, even if it's not an engagement, but even just like sort of a breakup type of situation, especially when you have things that you have to sort out after, right?
Yeah, I think a big part is it's okay to be selfish. And I think that was a big one that I had to get over, because I think during the whole relationship, even during the breakup, I was always still thinking of the other person. Like, oh, how are they going to be? How are they going to react? How's this? How's that for that? Do they have a support system, etc.? Because I mean, that's hard, because like for 7.5 years, I was constantly thinking about the other person in that manner. And then so even at the end, it was still the same. But I just had to remind myself that I had to think about myself this one time, because I learned that if you don't think about yourself and take care of your own priorities and your needs, and respecting your own boundaries, then why would someone else do it? So that's why I think with that too, being selfish, and also not thinking that because you're on this one path, that's the only path. I think that's the big thing for me through it all. It's that even though there might be this set trajectory that you think you're on, it doesn't mean that you can't deviate from it. And then you could go back on it, but you might deviate a little bit first. So that's okay. That there's no, like, your timeline is not the same as someone else's timeline. Like, yes, we have a biological like clock as women, which I hate talking about, because it adds the stress that we don't need, honestly. For sure. But that's a whole different topic.
After the breakup and everything, what was it like to be single again after being in like since like 21, I guess, and not having been single since then, like for most of your 20s? Were you like like go crazy, I'm gonna like party every day and I don't care and I don't give an F? Or were you more like introspective, like pondering life, like, I don't know, going on yoga retreats, that kind of thing? Like, what was it like to do that again?
It was fun, honestly, now that I'm looking back at it. So, I mean, I think coming from all the things I said about being in the relationship, once I was out of that relationship, it was important for me to try to figure out who I was without that relationship. Because unfortunately, that relationship, I think like really defined who I was. And I thought that was me. So then like once I was out of it, it was like, okay, who am I? Who's still there, after all of that happened? So it was a lot about stepping out of my comfort zone, and still to this day, still doing that, because I felt like in the relationship, I was comfortable and I was okay being there. But then after that, I was like, why? Why do I have to be comfortable?
Mm-hmm. Well, and you were
And
almost like forced to do that, right? Because you were no longer in this comfortable relationship. And then you were back out into like the world again as like a single
mhm,
person. So like in a way it was like almost you had to do that, right?
yeah, because I was already uncomfortable
Yeah.
being by myself because so once we ended that relationship, I ended up having to. I just moved back with my parents temporarily while
Yeah.
the dust settled. So
Mm-hmm.
then that alone was already kind of uncomfortable for me because
Yeah.
after being like out, it's
Yeah.
hard to go back and moving back in with a family, really.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I had to find ways to figure out who I wanted to be as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what ended up happening was I just started to say yes to more things
Mm-hmm.
because I kept catching myself saying no like right away
Mm-hmm.
to like things like such as going to spin. Like, oh, why did I say no so much before? And then
Mm-hmm.
the moment I said yes and I went to that class, like
Mm-hmm.
it was life changing in a way
Mm-hmm.
because I'm like, oh, I why did I say no before? Like, when
I
I've
can
never
do
even
this.
tried it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, like, I think that was a big stepping stone. I think what helped too was like when we went to Europe together shortly
Yes.
after the breakup and traveling, being in a new country, uh, that just gave me a whole new perspective of the world and life in general, that there was
Mm-hmm.
more to it than what I
Mm-hmm.
was in that bubble
Yeah.
that I was in. And
Yeah.
that really just expanded everything for me. And
Yeah.
that's kind of like just travel in general that really like lit the spark for that, and how my love for it grew more and more. Like I did a lot of traveling that year.
Yeah, yeah,
So
you
yeah,
did. Yeah, I
yeah.
was going to mention the same thing because we went to Europe and like my observation was that you just were so, like, it felt like you were so like liberated in a way. Like it was like you were exploring, you were having fun, and you were just like, it was like freedom for you. You like let go, let loose, and just really embrace like that moment. And for me, it was really cool to see because for the longest time, like I had not really witnessed that, and so like just being on a trip together and especially being in like Italy and Greece, like it was a good time because to see you, um, I don't want to get choked up here. Okay.
I know, I was choking up earlier.
Oh man, this really is a girl talk session, isn't it? Yeah, but just to see you like so free and so like yourself again on that trip was really really neat to see. And from there, like you said, you really discovered your love for things again. Like I feel like you've been trying so many different things in the past couple of years and finding like really what it is that you truly enjoy. And then um like what did you was there anything that you really wanted to, I guess you talked about that, it's like the getting out of your comfort zone kind of thing, but anything else that you sort of focused on during that period after like ending the relationship? Like did you want to be in another relationship again soon after, or did you really want to like sort of take your time and go through life kind of rediscovering yourself in a way?
My goal was to take my time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, and I did. Like, I didn't want to rush into a new relationship because I didn't just want it to be like a rebound, like
Mm-hmm.
after being in a relationship for so long, like I wanted to know how it was like to be single again,
Mm-hmm.
to go through life by myself. But I guess because of the experiences that I had shortly after the breakup, such as like the whole traveling, I think that just helped me like fast forward a little bit, be like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I think I'm ready. Like, I'm ready to just meet new people. That's how I approached it.
Yeah.
And then when I was meeting these people, I wanted to be as authentic as possible,
Mm-hmm.
in a way where I didn't have to pretend to be a certain way because you know what? Like I was like, I'm at this age where I can't play these games anymore. Like,
Yeah.
it's either we're gonna click or we're not gonna click in a way. Because like, I mean, that's why I'm thankful for that long-term relationship too, where I learned so much about what I like and don't like, or what I need and don't need in my future partner. So I think like in a way that's why when I approach dating, like it was more about okay, who do I want my partner to be? Like you know,
It was more clear for you. Like
yeah,
there's more clarity there.
yeah, exactly. Like I did end up on the apps again
Yeah.
shortly
Yeah.
after.
Different apps, but apps
Yeah,
again.
different
Yeah.
apps, but better apps actually.
Yeah. I know it's really evolved
Definitely.
since 2013
Yes.
or whatever.
Or however. Yeah, so like, and in those apps, I did end up like, I experimented a little bit and like went both like, okay, like I didn't, in my partner that I wanted, that I didn't care whether or not they were male or female. So then I was like, okay, I mean, like now's the time to explore that. And so I did. And then so I went on dates with both and I learned what I liked and didn't like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You really like, I feel like you really put yourself out there. Like you just were like, had this like F it mentality. It was like, I'm going to try everything. I'm going to see what I like and dislike. I think maybe because you were on that like one track mindset for so long that you went like the
Like,
opposite way where you're
opposite,
like,
yeah.
well,
Exactly.
let it all fly out the window. Yeah.
And like, you know what? I needed it. Honestly speaking, like I really needed that push off of that like mentality that I needed to follow only that one path. And it was, like you said, it was very liberating in all aspects.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. I wonder for you, like, do you ever think that because you were on that one track mindset that when it ended, it almost like was like made you open your eyes and be like, whoa, I was on this one track and like there are so many other tracks out there. It was like a shocking epiphany moment, maybe.
It really was because I honestly never even took the time during that relationship to think about this. And that to me is just a little crazy. Like, oh, I never thought of this in like 7.5 years. Like, it's interesting to me on how I got so fixated and didn't bother thinking about any of this now.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know if it's because of age or it's just because of that experience alone.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, like you had that kind of approach in when you were starting to date again, you experimented. Any like fears or apprehensions like dating both men and women? Like what did you discover, I guess? Anything that you found out that you didn't really realize or didn't know before? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of things.
Great question. I think one big thing that always like comes to mind is I always thought someone being nice was this one thing that I needed to have in a partner. But I'm like, once dating, I was like, everybody can be nice.
Everyone's nice.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I'm like, everyone can be nice, you know? So I'm just like,
you just really set the bar real low there.
Yeah.
Like, all they have to be is nice.
I know, exactly.
Yeah.
That's why I was like, oh, I learned that really quickly though. That was probably after like 1 or 2 dates. I was like, oh, there's actually a lot of nice people in this world. I mean, there's also not, but I mean, like, there's still a lot of nice people.
Yeah.
And I just realized, like, wow, yeah, my bar was pretty low. And so then, like, I realized, like, okay, like, I have a lot that I can work with.
What was interesting are the differences between dating men and dating women. Like, are there differences?
I think so.
Yeah.
I felt like this is again my own personal experience and opinion.
Yeah.
I feel like when I am out on a date with men, I feel like I still end up having to follow a certain demeanor as a woman, where like I feel like there's still this type of expectations that men may have, how you're supposed to act on a date, for example, or like who's going to ask out who, like those little things. Like I
Yeah.
felt like there was that when you're dating like a guy, but when you're dating a girl, it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
because I mean, who wears the pants then,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it was just very different. Like I felt like there were moments that because it was so new to me that I felt like I had to step up a little bit more rather than when you're talking to a guy, we wait for them to step up.
Mm-hmm.
While if you're both girls, then you're like, okay, well, who's gonna do it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so then I felt like I had to. So then when you were actually out on a date with them, it was almost the same as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's not as much like expectation because like to me when I first was dating I was like, I guess it's just kind of like going out with a regular like with a friend. So then I felt like there was less pressure in that sense compared to if I was dating out with a guy. So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah. I feel like it's almost like a more equal playing field when you're dating women because you're also a woman. And then with a guy, I mean, undeniably, there's that different kind of dynamic, right? When you're like a guy and a girl. So, okay.
It's like, and like one thing is like, oh, so who's going to pay for the bill?
Right.
Right? Like it's typical when you're out with a guy that they might offer to, right? I mean, I'm always the type to also offer, but I mean, like a lot of the times I would say that society expects the guy to pay. But then when you're out with another girl, then who? Or at least that was my reaction. I'm like, who does pay?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was...
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it was Jono who came on and said that like in those kinds of relationships, in like same-sex relationships, there isn't that sort of like the same hetero like dynamic that you exhibit in like a male-female relationship kind of thing. It's like not, there's just no dynamic like that where it's like one person has like a certain expectations put on them and then another person has a different expectation put on them, or like the norms. I mean, whether people want to like admit it or not, there is that sort of like expectation or norm that is still there in to some degree. So yeah, that is really interesting. Any sort of other like perspectives on relationship, like changes on your perspective on relationships after this? Like, I know you've mentioned quite a few times already, right, that you had this one track mindset and like your priorities and your perspectives on a lot of things have changed since then. Do you still kind of envision the same sort of path now in your future, in your relationship or your future relationships, or is it looking a little bit different these days?
I'd say it's looking a little different these days. I mean, just from where we came or where I came from like the relationship point of view, like marriage, for example, I still understand the importance and significance of being married to someone, but I personally don't think that it's the end all be all kind of mentality. I think that you don't necessarily have to be married to someone to be committed to them, and or to show your commitment to them. Like, I don't think that I think that that's definitely changed for me. The fact that I was engaged and just about to get married, because of that, it really just got me thinking, like, okay, is this what I really want or need? Do I need it? Like, I don't know. Unless it's really important to my partner and they can help me understand why it's important to them, then I might lean towards still like getting married.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily something that I feel that I actually truly need to feel that I'm like successful or like that I've reached it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like sometimes to some people, marriage is like a goal.
Yeah.
And to me, it's not necessarily that anymore. It's just like, if it happens, it happens. But if it doesn't, that's okay with me too. And the same kind of goes with like having kids. Because I thought I was going to have kids right after marriage at the time. I thought, well, my goal at the time was that, oh, I'm going to have 1 or 2 kids before I turn 30.
Yeah.
30 now.
You're in your 30s, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that also has changed for me, especially being in a same-sex relationship now. I mean, having kids is definitely a bigger decision, I would say. It's not just like, oh, oops.
Yeah.
You know?
Oops, here it is.
Yeah, it's not just that anymore. Like, so it's definitely something that needs to be well thought out in advance in a way. So yeah, like that part has changed for me, especially because like I thought again that kids was something that I needed to have, but then now thinking about it, and also just from being like, my sister has 2 kids now, and I've talked to her about this too. And like, I remember listening to one of your podcasts, I think it was with David's sister, about like, you know, like, is this something that you really want or not want? And like really making, it's a big decision. It's not just like on a whim. So I think that one's changed for me. Well, before I feel like it was a on the whim kind of decision.
Because you felt like you had to, or because you felt like it was on that path, right?
Yeah. So I think that those are big ones that have changed for me.
Yeah. I mean, even Joy had said in her podcast that, you know, like if you are unsure, just wait because like, you know, kids will, kids deserve parents who like really want them and are ready, I guess. Ready to a certain degree.
I know. I was like, you can never be ready. I feel like I've talked to my sister about it, and she was like, "Yeah, I mean, she wasn't ready, but here she is, 2 kids later." So,
but I guess it just like the end of that relationship or your past relationship really showed you, like, really made you like reflective in a sense, right? Because it was like, oh, all these things that I thought I wanted maybe were just things that it was an expectation that I put on myself, but wasn't like, was it really something that I wanted? And like, after seeing, you know, your sister and her kids too, it's just like, just made you question it a little bit more, I guess. Have your extended family, I guess, and your parents, like, do they see things a little bit differently now too? Or do you still think that they have sort of that mentality of like that trajectory? Or are they like looking at you and being like, oh, like, you know, maybe this is not exactly everyone's path, I suppose?
That one's a great question, actually, because I was just recently in the Philippines, like I mentioned, so I actually got to speak to a lot of my extended family. And so I think they think that I'm still gonna go that same trajectory. Like, I don't think they see me deviating from that. But I've kind of accepted that that's what they're gonna think, and that I don't care anymore that that's what they think. Because now that I've experienced what I've experienced, and like that I can really reflect on like why they think that I should have that trajectory. I feel like sometimes they're kind of because they hope that their kids are going to go in that trajectory, so then they think that I should go that trajectory, etc. But realistically, I feel like they're kind of jaded in that sense. Like they don't see that these things, like experiences, change a person, so that it could change the way that they want to approach life.
Yeah.
So in a way, like when it comes to that, like they might support me, they might not support me, but at the end of the day, I don't really care as much anymore.
Like you're okay with that.
Yeah, and that's okay. Like, or I feel like they'll accept it later on, maybe not right away. But again, that's just with my extended family. When it comes to my immediate family, though, it's a little different for me for sure. I do think that, like, my parents are very supportive in the sense that they're happy to see me happy with doing whatever it is that I am doing. But I think that they still think I'm going to go on that trajectory because I haven't had these conversations with them yet.
Right.
We're not there yet, or at least with my parents, I'm not there yet, but I have spoken to my sister, and like, she understands where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because this whole experience has actually made me closer with my sister as well, because I was able to confide in her through the breakup and even post breakup. So I think that was good for our relationship.
Yeah.
And then when it came to my friends, I think through it all, new friendships were formed, and I'm very grateful for that, because if I didn't have these individuals in my life during that time, I don't think I could have got through it the way that I did.
I guess maybe a couple more questions, but just like when you started going into dating again, like what were some values or qualities that you were kind of looking for in a new partner? Or did you even have those things? Because like, you know, your past relationship didn't work out, but did you go in with a total open mind, or did you kind of know what you wanted in a partner, aside from being nice? any other qualities or values that you think are like were just really important to you as a person when you started dating again?
I mean, I would say a big thing would be that I wanted to be with someone who made me feel heard, whether it was through like the small little things and especially the major things. Like I want to be heard, not just them listening. Like, yeah, I could be a good listener, but then you can not feel heard as well, right?
Yeah.
So I think that was a big part. And also that they would be open to like, or just being open-minded in general, like, and non-judgmental. I think you can get a vibe off someone pretty quickly, like within the first date, right? Like, do they say this one thing, but then really they're thinking something else? Like, you know, like you get a vibe. And I think that was a major thing for me, that it had to be non-judgmental, because like here I am going to be extremely authentic with them. And so if they accept, like if you can get a gist of them being accepting or not, then either you move on or you don't, or whatever, right?
It seemed like you were pretty open when you were like, so did you kind of like, were you open in your dating? Like, were you just told them like kind of your life story, or did you kind of like suss out the vibes first before you kind of got into that?
I was actually pretty open. I remember being on this date with this one person, and I just started talking about my whole past. And then they did too. And I'm just like, oh, okay. I mean, like, hey, it was like first date or second date, and then we were already talking about like our past. And I'm like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. Like, as long as they're okay with that. Because, like, I feel like sometimes, like, there's this, like, book or something saying, like, you can't talk about this on a first date. But then I think that book was out the window.
Yeah.
And then I learned actually through that date, like, oh, no topic or of conversation is actually like off
limits.
What's that? Off limits. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of depends on the person too, right? Sometimes people are like so open and they'll like start spilling all of their life to you, and then you can, I mean, I always find that if the other person is vulnerable, then that kind of gives you a window to be vulnerable too, and vice versa. Like if you can be vulnerable, then it leaves the door open a little bit for that other person to be vulnerable when you're dating too. So it's just like not wasting time, I guess. You're just like going into it. Yeah.
That's the exact term, actually. Yeah. Just, I stayed vulnerable. Even though, I went through a heartbreak. Like, I think it's still important to know that that's okay. that it's okay to still to continue to be vulnerable, even when your heart's been broken.
Yeah.
Because it will heal. They say time heals all wounds, right? Some faster than others, and I think that's true. And I think like that was a major thing for me, where I realized that heartbreak is just one of the pains in life, but there's also like things that are worse. So you know what, like you will get through it, like no matter what. Yeah.
Wow, that was so touching. I mean, I've definitely seen like everything that you've been through, and like now just how happy you are, and it's just great to see, right? So it was I think if anything, this podcast really showed people or can teach people that you can go through all these hard things in life, but if you take it as kind of a learning experience and then continue forward with like doing the things that you love, trying new things, a lot of that will heal with time and with people around you and close friends and family. Yeah. Well, I really want to thank you for coming on today. I know that, you got really vulnerable with everyone, and I really appreciate you for doing that. I mean, it's been a while, I guess, since it happened. So hopefully this episode also gave you a chance to like reflect a little bit about, because I feel like a lot of these things I've never asked you before, we never talked about either. So hopefully it was a good chance for you to reflect, and also just sharing your experience. I think a lot of people can relate. I mean, I've never been through this situation, but I can relate to a lot of the things that you said too about, being independent and changing when you're in like a relationship, and things to think about, right? As you go through the relationship. So thank you for coming on and talking to me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, that was fun. It felt kind of therapeutic.
Honestly, I thought I was talking to my therapist.
Nice. That's what I like to hear.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, David's not here to do the spiel, so I will say it. If you enjoyed this episode, or if you resonated with anything that was talked about today, or if you just had a grand old listen, please share this episode, share this podcast with someone, and we would really appreciate a rating or a comment on our podcast. As a reminder, we are doing bi-weekly podcast now, so we are not going to have an episode next week, but David will be back for the following episode. So until then, hope you guys all have a great day, a great week, and talk next time. Bye.
Bye.